My name is Veronica Johnson, and I am a meteorologist on air in Washington, D.C. at NBC4. I want to say what a pleasure it is to be part of the Congressional Black Caucus Annual Conference, and I'm honored to serve as your moderator on today's issue forum, Climate Change, Are We Ready? With Senator Barack Obama. Now today we'll hear from a panel of experts and discuss how African Americans can become better informed, educated, and motivated on the issue of climate change and its impact on the African American community. The senator has requested that you accept his apologies for his lateness. He's actually on his way. He just finished completing some remarks at Howard University's convocation ceremony. At this time, I'd like to thank the senator, his staff, especially Indira Hennard, the Bipartisan Policy Center, all the panelists who flew here today and took of their time to be with us, and of course all of you out in the audience. I'd like to start by introducing you to our panelists that we have here today. After each introduction, they'll have the opportunity to speak for up to 2 minutes on the importance of the discussion and being here today. First, we have the Reverend Dr. Gerald Durley. Reverend Durley is one of the nation's leading experts on the impact of climate change on African American communities, and he is leading the charge among black clergy to address this critical issue. Dr. Durley believes that for the environment to be saved, the educational, scientific, business, political, and religious communities must join forces and agree on positive actions for immediate constructive change. The Reverend Durley.
Thank you very much, Veronica. I was hoping that I'd be last so I could hear what the others had to say, and then I could kind of follow up. But this is a very important issue. About 2 or 3 years ago, I was introduced to a film called The Great Warming, and then of course you'll hear from the person who produced The Inconvenient Truth. Many have asked, why would I, who was involved with the civil rights movement for 30 or 35 years, why at this time would an African American minister in the South become involved with something that many think is an impending kind of issue 30 to 50 years from now? I began to read about what was actually going on in the climate change, not only just the weather temperatures, but also the melting of Antarctica and Greenland and other places. I began to look at the way that animals began to change, and I began to wonder, how is this negatively impacting us? I began to look at the environmental toxic waste around our urban areas, where 44% of the major cities that were negatively impacted because of toxic waste. I began to read medical reports where our children had 6 times more asthmatic conditions than the white child, and older people from heat exhaustion was occurring. So I wondered, is this something that is just happening? Then people began to say, because of the film Inconvenient Truth, Al Gore is making a political statement. I began to understand that this was larger than a political statement. This was a moral crisis, because we had some control in our own lives to determine how the consumption patterns that we use, the wastefulness that we use. I began to look and study the auto industry and the oil industry and fossil burning fuels and how they were negatively impacting many of us in the urban areas, and that this was a global situation, how China and how other major fossil burning companies got into it. So I said, what does that mean for me as an African American Baptist preacher in the South? I think everything starts with a belief system. Right now, those of us in the African American community, we feel the heat and we see things going, but we really don't believe that that's happening because we've got jail, we've got HIV and other things. I'm here to say today, I thank Senator Barack Obama and the other panelists and those of you here today, because it brings a level of awareness. This is something that is imminent, that will negatively impact our children and our lives today. We've got to take charge of the greenhouse gases. We've got to look at the carbon dioxide buildup and the carbon dioxide and the carbon buildup in our climate. We can do it any number of ways, and I'm sure that will be the discussion today. And so we have to understand that everything moves in the psychic, the noma, and the pneuma, the psychic, and the soma, the body, the mind, and the spirit. Right now, our spirits must come together to work along with the scientists. Believing is seeing. Seeing is not believing. This workshop today, I hope, will make us all much more acutely aware that this is a major impending crisis, and we can do something about it. Thank you.
Next, we have the Senator Rodney Ellis. Senator Ellis is currently serving in his 6th term in the Texas Senate from Houston. During his 16-year tenure in the Texas Senate, the senator has earned praise as a legislative leader on economic development, education, civil rights, criminal justice, energy, environmental, and workforce development issues. Senator Ellis currently serves on the National Commission on Energy Policy. Senator Ellis.
Thank you. I hail from Houston, Texas, which to many people is known as the energy capital of the world. The harsh reality is that for some time people thought global warming was something that was coming. Well, it's here now. The reality is African Americans, just like everyone else, has to have a seat. We have to have a seat at the table. It's not enough to be involved when the floodwaters are coming. I also represent the city of Houston. A lot of our neighbors in New Orleans, when the hurricane came, ended up evacuating Houston. And a lot of us realized when it was a bit too late that this issue does impact us. So I think this forum is timely. I salute Senator Barack Obama for putting it on the table. I think you're going to find out a lot today. When I was in school, sometimes when professors wanted to motivate me to study something, they'd say, well, if I want to make sure that you don't find something, I just put it in the book. Well, from time to time, I tell that to my kids. And now my kids tell me, no, Daddy, it's in the computer. And then they tell me, oh, Dad, we don't even have to read the books. We can just put them on our iPod. This issue is real. It's important. Our communities will be disproportionately impacted. Everybody, regardless of race, creed, political philosophy, has to take an interest in this issue. The harsh reality as I close is that we in America are only 5% of the world's population. Yet we contribute at the very least, 25% of the emissions that create this problem. It's our responsibility as people of color. It's our right to be at the table, and that's what we're going to find out how to do today. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. We also have with us today Mr. Lawrence Bender, renowned producer and political activist, boasts an illustrious career spanning more than 20 years in the entertainment industry. His films to date, among them influential mega hits Kill Bill Volume 1 and 2, Good Will Hunting, Pulp Fiction, as well as Reservoir Dogs, and he's been honored with 21 Academy Award nominations, including 2 for Best Picture. Bender's most recent film, An Inconvenient Truth, weaves the science of global warming with Al Gore's lifelong dedication to reversing the effects of global climate change.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thank you.
Senator Obama, we were just going through the introductions, but I'll go ahead and I'll let Mr. Bender finish up, and we'll...
That'll be fun.
Okay. Senator...
Just ignore me.
Well, that's a tough act to follow. I'm going to talk while they're taking pictures of him, as it should be. By the way, he had an amazing rally in New York, 24,000 people in New York yesterday, so congratulations. Okay, let me just briefly say, when I saw Al Gore give his presentation on global warming, like everybody, I was deeply moved. And I thought to myself, what can I do? Well, I had this kind of crazy idea to make a movie, and we went off and did it. And it did have some positive effect, and we're all very happy about that. But the problem is, as the Reverend has said, is that we are now experiencing global warming. We are in a dangerous situation now of climate change. The question is, can we prevent catastrophic climate change? Today, we're spewing 70 million tons a day of CO2 into the atmosphere. Every 3 days, we're building somewhere in the world a new coal-fired power plant that will last 60, 80 years. In the next 2 decades, those coal plants will spew more CO2 in the atmosphere than the entire history of mankind combined. The effects that they're having around the world are being seen now. Since the movie's come out, just a few weeks ago, it was reported that at the North Pole, that more ice has melted than ever before. 1 million square miles of ice more than ever before. There's only 1.6 million square miles of ice left. They're saying by the year 2030, it used to be the year 2050, they're saying by the year 2030 there'll be no ice in the North Pole in the summertime. When you look at North Africa, the deserts are greatly expanding to the south. If you look at Asia and China, the high plateaus, these glaciers are rapidly shrinking. They supply 7 rivers that supply water and irrigation and drinking water to hundreds of millions of people. In the Himalayas, the same thing, supplying hundreds of millions of people in India. And of course, in our own country, we're seeing those effects. An effect that could have been prevented in Katrina, when we had levees, and this is kind of an analogy of what's going on today. There were levees that we all knew would be broken by hurricane forces. We knew it would happen. It was being predicted. We were told it was going to happen, and it happened. And unfortunately, the people that were affected are people that don't have the means, that people are poor, and these are people who did everything right. If you look at the people in the 9th Ward, they did everything right. They had jobs, they had families, they had houses, and yet look what happened. The same thing is happening right now with global warming. We know it's happening, the scientists are telling it's happening, but not enough is being done. And that's one of the reasons why we're here today, is to understand that global warming is an issue that affects every one of us in this country, around the world. It's probably one of the most pressing issues in our lifetime. And I'll just leave you with one little statement. Now that I have a little boy, I kind of started late. When he grows up, he's going to ask me this question. He's going to be one of 2 questions he's going to ask me. He's going to say, "Dad, what were you thinking? Why didn't you guys do anything about this?" Or he's going to say, "Dad, what gave everybody the moral courage to do something about this, to stand up when it was hard and to do something?" Let's hope it's the latter. Thank you.
Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, Senator Barack Obama. He has dedicated his life to public service as a community organizer, civil rights attorney, and leader in the Illinois State Senate. Currently, as a member of the U.S. Senate, Barack Obama has focused on tackling the challenges of globalization, 21st century world, and fresh thinking in politics that no longer settles for the lowest common denominator. Mr. Obama.
Good afternoon, everybody. I am sorry I'm a little bit late. I was just at the Howard University convocation. They all send greetings from Howard. We probably got some Howard graduates in the house.
I'm one.
Let me begin by saying thank you to this wonderful panel. Moderator Veronica Johnson, Dr. Warren Washington, Dr. Beverly Wright, Van Jones, Lawrence Bender, Reverend Gerald Durley, and Rodney Ellis. This is an extraordinarily distinguished panel, and I want to thank them for taking the time out of their busy schedules to be here. And I want to say how glad I am to see this extraordinary audience here today. I have to say that when we first started talking about organizing a panel around environmental issues, a lot of people raised their eyebrows. They said, huh? Because the assumption
That's right.
Well,
That's right.
is that African Americans have more important things to think about. The assumption is that, given the struggles we face with joblessness and with a substandard education system, with people who are working having a tougher and tougher time making ends meet, with violence in our communities, that environmental concerns are low on the list. And it's certainly true that there are many immediate concerns that our communities face on a day-to-day basis. But the more we thought about the topic, the more we liked it, because it is time, I think, for our communities to recognize that the urgent problems that we face with the planet are going to disproportionately impact us. When Katrina happened, one of the things that I was asked after the storm was, do you think there was racism involved in what was taking place? And I said, well, actually, you know, the incompetence was colorblind on the part of this administration. But what I do know is this, that whoever was thinking about these issues assumed that people could just get in their SUVs and fill up their tank with gas and put some Perrier water in the back and drive to the nearest hotel, check into the hotel and with their credit card. There was no thought to who might be left behind. And what that speaks to is the fact that on all of these issues, it is the poor and the dispossessed who are disproportionately going to be impacted. It is their homes that are going to be ruined. It is their crops that will be destroyed. The refugees and the displaced will be the black and brown people around the world. And so the notion somehow that this is an issue that we should ignore, that we shouldn't be speaking to, makes no sense. And I couldn't think of a better forum to ignite the kind of soul-searching and the kind of energy to put into this issue than at the CBC conference. So, you know, the severe weather and impacts associated with climate change disproportionately affect low-income and minority communities. They're more threatened by heat waves and storms and floods. They're more likely to live near oil refineries and other sources of dirty energy pollution. We saw this vulnerability in the Gulf Coast region. One reporter aptly summed up the vulnerability of residents in the lower-lying areas of New Orleans by observing that, I quote, water flows away from money in the city. Many of those who were hardest hit were too poor to escape the devastation, so we're going to have to think about addressing the fact that poverty was a fact of life in the Gulf Coast even before the hurricane struck. But we also need to do a better job of cleaning up the damage that resulted from the storm. We can't forget about that. Hurricane Katrina's devastation of 3,000 homes meant that a large amount of toxic chemicals, such as paint and bleach, had to be disposed of. Trucking all this waste into man-made holes in the ground near devastated communities have been the wrong way to do it. So we know that we need to act now, and we need to act aggressively on this particular issue of environmental justice, because the fact is, for all the advances we've made in the environmental movement, the benefits have not yet reached people who live, for example, in the 9th Ward. Their communities are still polluted, they still have too few parks and green spaces. But I'm hopeful, because through 3 decades of hard work, the environmental justice movement has been changing that, and I'm glad to be a part of that movement. Some of you know that as a community organizer, I helped to form a tenants organization in the housing projects down in the far south side of Chicago that successfully forced the city and federal governments to clear asbestos from pipes in more than 1,200 apartments. Today, I'm still fighting that fight. That's why I introduced what I call the Healthy Places Act, to help local governments identify and address potential health problems in their communities. And that's why I've called for us to ensure that low-income and minority communities have the ability to sue to protect their environment and health. Now, I understand my friend Congressman Clyburn had an important forum on environmental justice earlier today. He's been a leader in this movement, and I commend him for that. My church has also been a leader. The United Church of Christ issued a landmark report on environmental justice in 1987 and has been doing grassroots work ever since. And earlier this year, the UCC sponsored a new study that found that 56% of the people who live near hazardous waste facilities are minorities. So we know we have more work to do. But if we're serious about environmental justice, then at the top of our list is going to have to be climate change. We're going to need to make our communities energy efficient. We're going to have to invest in light rail and other types of public transportation, something that's going to be especially important as the price of gas goes up, as it will inevitably happen, given increased demand. By capping the amount of carbon that can be emitted into our atmosphere and auctioning up carbon credits, we can raise money for research into green technologies and for creating jobs in these communities. We know we'll need help from communities themselves to make this happen. You know, millions of buildings will need to be retrofitted. Millions of solar panels will need to be installed. Tens of thousands of wind farms need to be constructed. And one way we can do this is to train urban and rural youth to make it happen. That's why I've proposed to set up a youth service corps that would educate young people about energy efficiency, helping them improve the environment in their communities and providing them with the tools to succeed in their jobs of the future. We should also direct the federal government to assist low-income communities affected by climate change. For instance, we should have the National Environmental Justice Advisory Council put together a report on how climate change is going to affect low-income and minority communities and give us recommendations on how to respond. So these are a few steps that I think we can take, but the fact is that we've been talking about this issue for some time. We have not yet acted with determination or urgency. In part, that's because Congress has put the interests of special interests ahead of the common interest, the national interest. So I'm looking forward to our discussion, but I think that we have to bear in mind that we're not going to fix many of these problems unless we fix a broken.
Next on our panel, we have about global warming. We have to talk about. My name is Veronica Johnson, and I am a meteorologist on air in Washington, D.C. at NBC4. I want to say what a pleasure it is to be part of the Congressional Black Caucus Annual Conference, and I'm honored to serve as your moderator on today's issue forum, Climate Change, Are We Ready, with Senator Barack Obama. Now today we'll hear from a panel of experts and discuss how African Americans can become better informed, educated, and motivated on the issue of climate change and its impact on the African American community. The Senator has requested that you accept his apologies for his lateness